My name is Emily, and I'm 32 years old. For 5 years, I believed that hard work and loyalty mattered in the workplace. I believed that if you showed up every day, did your job well, and gave everything you had, you'd be treated with respect. That belief shattered on a Monday morning in October when I was fired in front of 40 people. No warning, no explanation, just silence and shame. But what happened next when an elderly janitor pressed a cold metal key into my palm and whispered words that would change everything, that's when I learned what real courage looks like. Before I share what happened that morning, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit like and subscribe because what came next changed everything I thought I knew about loyalty and truth. Let me take you back to that day. I worked at a mid-sized marketing company in Denver, Colorado. Our office occupied the entire fifth floor of a downtown building, an open space concept where about 40 employees worked. The energy was usually good collaborative, the kind of place where people celebrated birthdays with cake and stayed late together when deadlines loomed. I was a senior account manager, a position I'd earned after 5 years of proving myself. I'd started as a junior associate and worked my way up, staying late, taking on extra projects, building relationships with our biggest clients. My boss was Dylan Parker, the marketing director. He was 45, always impeccably dressed in tailored suits with perfectly styled silver hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Dylan had a reputation for being charming with clients and demanding with staff. I'd learned to navigate his moods to anticipate what he needed before he asked. I thought we had a good working relationship. I thought I was valued. I had 3 close colleagues who made the job bearable. Jessica worked as an account executive on my team, a 30-year-old woman with bright red hair and a quick laugh. Marcus was our creative director, a 40-something guy with a beard and an impressive portfolio. Sarah was our junior designer, 26, and full of fresh ideas. We'd grab lunch together, share frustrations over coffee, support each other through tough client meetings. Just 3 weeks before that October Monday, I'd closed the biggest deal of my career, a campaign for a tech company that brought in $2 million in revenue. Dylan had shaken my hand in front of everyone, called me a rock star, promised a bonus. I'd felt proud, validated, like all those years of work had finally paid off. That Monday morning started like any other. I arrived at 8, the Denver air, crisp and cold autumn settling into the city. I carried my usual vanilla latte from the coffee shop downstairs, wore my favorite gray blazer, felt good about the week ahead. But the moment I stepped off the elevator onto our floor, something felt wrong. The usual morning chatter was absent. People hunched over their desks, eyes glued to screens. Nobody looked up when I walked in. Jessica glanced at me from across the room, and I saw something in her face that made my stomach drop. Worry, pity. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, then closed it again and looked away. Before I could reach my desk, Dylan appeared from around a corner. His face was set in hard lines, no trace of his usual smile. Helen Morrison, our HR director, stood beside him. Helen was 60, gray-haired, usually warm. Today she wouldn't meet my eyes. Dylan's voice cut through the quiet. "Emily, we need you in the large conference room. Now." My heart started pounding. The large conference room was where they held important meetings, quarterly reviews, sometimes terminations. I followed them down the hallway, my heels clicking too loudly on the tile floor. Through the glass walls, I could see people watching, then quickly looking away. Inside the conference room, Dylan closed the door. Helen sat down, her hands folded on the table. Dylan remained standing, arms crossed. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Nobody spoke for what felt like an eternity. Then Dylan delivered the words that would crack my world open. "Emily, we're terminating your employment effective immediately." The words didn't make sense at first. My brain couldn't process them. I just closed a $2 million deal. My performance reviews had been excellent. I'd never received a single warning, never been written up for anything. "I don't understand." I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. What are you talking about? You violated company policies. Dylan said, his tone clipped and rehearsed. Your behavior hasn't aligned with our company culture. What behavior? I demanded, standing up. What policy? Give me specifics. Helen finally spoke, her voice quiet. The decision has been made at a level above us, Emily. We can't provide additional details. That's ridiculous, I said, feeling anger rise through the shock. I've been here 5 years. You can't just fire me without telling me why. I have a right to know what I supposedly did wrong. Dylan's jaw tightened. The decision is final. You'll need to collect your personal belongings and leave the premises. This is insane, I said, looking between them. 3 weeks ago, you called me a rock star. Now you're firing me. This makes no sense. Sometimes these things happen quickly, Helen said, still not looking at me. We'll provide you with a severance package if you sign the termination agreement. The reality started sinking in. They weren't going to give me answers. They'd already decided. Whatever this was, it had been planned. The whole thing felt orchestrated, scripted, wrong. But what came next was worse than anything I could have imagined. Dylan led me back into the main office area. Everyone was there. All 40 employees at their desks, supposedly working, but I could feel every eye on us. The air felt thick with tension and awkward silence. My pulse thundered in my ears. Dylan stopped in the center of the room and raised his voice so everyone could hear. I need everyone's attention for a moment. The typing stopped. Phones were set down. Complete silence fell. Emily is no longer with the company, effective immediately. Please be aware of this change moving forward. That was it. No thank you for 5 years of service, no acknowledgement of my contributions, no explanation, just a public announcement of my termination delivered like I was a security threat that needed to be broadcast to everyone. The humiliation burned through me like acid. I stood there frozen as 40 pairs of eyes stared at me. Some looked shocked, some looked uncomfortable. Most looked away quickly, afraid to be associated with whatever taint I supposedly carried. Nobody said a word. Nobody asked questions. The silence was deafening. Jessica's eyes were shiny with tears, but when she started to stand up, Dylan shot her a look that made her sink back down. Marcus stared at his keyboard, his face pale. Sarah had her hand over her mouth, clearly stunned. But not one person spoke up. Not one person defended me. A security guard I barely knew, Tom, appeared at my elbow. He was about 50, gray uniform, expressionless face. Ma'am, I'll need to escort you while you collect your belongings. The walk to my desk felt like a death march. Everyone watched me pass, then immediately looked away when I glanced in their direction. The desk I'd sat at for 5 years, decorated with framed photos of my family. A small cactus plant I'd named Frank, my favorite Wonder Woman coffee mug. Stacks of notebooks filled with campaign ideas suddenly looked foreign. These items were mine, but I no longer belonged here. My hands shook as I opened drawers and pulled out personal items. Tom stood 3 feet away, watching my every move like I might steal office supplies. The humiliation was complete. I was being treated like a criminal in front of people I'd worked alongside for years, shared lunches with, stayed late with during crunch times. People I'd considered friends. I found a cardboard box in the supply closet, Tom following me even there. I loaded my picture frames, my plant, my mug, my notebooks. Each item felt heavier than the last. I kept my head up, refused to let them see me cry, but inside I was crumbling. How had this happened? What had I done to deserve this treatment? As I packed, Jessica walked by and whispered without stopping, "I'm so sorry." It was the only kindness I received. Marcus caught my eye from across the room and gave a small, confused shrug like he had no idea what was happening either. Everyone else pretended to work while sneaking glances at the spectacle. Helen appeared again, pulling me aside near the elevators. She pressed a manila envelope into my hands. "Your severance package. 2 weeks' pay. You'll need to sign the termination agreement to receive it. I want to know why I'm being fired. I said, my voice steady despite the rage and hurt coursing through me. 5 years of service and I can't get a straight answer. Helen's face softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. Emily, I wish I could tell you more, but you need to sign the paperwork. If you don't sign, you won't receive any severance. It felt like extortion. Sign away my rights to question this or leave with nothing. I stared at the envelope at Helen's tired face at the office behind me where 40 people pretended not to watch. I need time to think about it, I said. You have until end of business today, Helen said. After that, the offer expires. And I walked toward the elevator carrying my cardboard box of 5 years' worth of belonging. The weight of it felt symbolic. Everything I'd built here reduced to a box of trinkets. I passed my old desk one last time. Already empty, already erased, like I'd never existed. The hallways felt longer than usual. I passed the break room where we'd celebrated birthdays and promotions. I passed the conference room where I'd presented winning campaigns. I passed photos on the walls of company events where my face smiled back from group shots. Soon those photos would be replaced and I'd be completely forgotten. Near the exit, I saw Walter, the building's janitor. He was 68 years old, a gentle man with kind brown eyes and gray hair. He'd worked at this building for 15 years longer than anyone. Walter was always the first to arrive and the last to leave. He'd seen employees come and go, witnessed office politics and drama, but always maintained a quiet dignity. We'd become friendly over the years. He'd remember my coffee order and ask about my family. He always had a smile and a kind word. Today, Walter's face was serious. He was standing near the elevators holding a broom, but something about his posture seemed deliberately casual, like he was waiting. When I got close, our eyes met. He glanced around quickly, making sure nobody was nearby. Tom, the security guard, had stopped to talk to someone at the front desk. Walter moved closer and said in a low voice barely above a whisper, "Miss Emily, wait for me at parking spot B17. Give me 15 minutes." I was too shocked to question it. I just nodded. Walter quickly moved away, pushing his cleaning cart like nothing had happened. But his eyes had held something urgent, something important. Tom returned to escort me the final steps out of the building. The October air hit me as I stepped outside, cold and sharp. I stood on the sidewalk holding my box, feeling completely unmoored. Everything I'd known, everything I'd built gone in less than an hour. I walked to the parking garage, found spot B17 and waited. The parking garage was dim and quiet, cars sitting in neat rows under flickering fluorescent lights. The concrete walls echoed every distant sound, footsteps from other levels, car engines, starting doors slamming. I set my box on the ground and wrapped my arms around myself against the cold. October in Denver could be brutal, the temperature dropping fast once the sun started its descent. 15 minutes felt like an hour. I kept replaying the morning in my head, Dylan's cold announcement, the 40 silent faces, the walk of shame to my desk, Helen's envelope. Nothing made sense. I'd done good work. I'd brought in revenue. I'd followed every rule. So why? Why like this? Why so sudden and cruel? Finally, I saw Walter emerge from the stairwell. He looked around carefully, almost nervously, before approaching me. Up close, I could see the concern etched into the lines of his weathered face. "Miss Emily," he said quietly, "I'm so sorry about what happened to you up there. It wasn't right. None of it was right." "Thank you, Walter," I said, surprised by how much his words meant. "But how do you know what happened?" "Were you up on the 5th floor?" "I clean every floor in this building," Walter said. "I see things, I hear things, and what I've seen and heard lately, it's been eating at me, especially after watching them do that to you this morning." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver key. It looked old, worn smooth by years of use. He pressed it into my palm, and the metal felt cold against my skin. "What's this?" I asked, staring at the key. "That key opens locker number 234 in the gym on the basement level of this building," Walter said, his voice low and urgent. "Inside that locker, there's something you need to see. Something that explains why this happened to you." My heart started racing. "Walter, what are you talking about? What's in the locker?" He glanced over his shoulder again, making sure we were still alone. 3 weeks ago, I was cleaning the 5th floor late at night. It was about 10 o'clock. I thought everyone had gone home, but I heard voices coming from Dylan's office. I was in the hallway mopping, and his door was cracked open. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, Miss Emily, but I couldn't help hearing. "What did you hear?" I asked, gripping the key tighter. Dylan was on the phone with someone. His voice was tense, angry almost. He said, and I remember this exactly because it chilled me. He said, "We need to get rid of Emily before she figures it out." The person on the other end said something I couldn't hear, and then Dylan said, "I'll find a reason to fire her, fast and clean, before she has time to dig deeper." The parking garage seemed to tilt around me. "He said my name. He said that about me." Walter nodded solemnly. "I wanted to tell someone right then, but who would believe an old janitor? I'm nobody here. I just clean floors and empty trash. But it's been eating at me ever since watching Dylan act normal around you while planning to destroy your career." Then 2 days after I heard that conversation, I saw Dylan in the building gym late one evening. He put something in that locker, locked it, and left. The man looked nervous, kept checking over his shoulder. "How did you get the key?" I asked. "I have master keys for the building maintenance," Walter admitted. "I made a copy of the gym locker key. I know it wasn't right, but something told me it was important. I looked in the locker once just quickly. There's an envelope inside with documents. I didn't read them, didn't want to get more involved than I already was. But after watching what they did to you today, I couldn't stay silent. You deserve to know the truth." And I looked down at the key in my hand, this small piece of metal that apparently held answers to questions I didn't even know I had. Why would Dylan want to get rid of me? What could I have possibly figured out? "That's what the documents will tell you," Walter said. "But you need to be careful, Miss Emily. The gym is open until 9 tonight. Go back around 8:30 when it's less crowded. Get what's in that locker and then decide what to do with it. But whatever you find, Dylan is dangerous. He's not the man he pretends to be." "Walter," I said, emotion tightening my throat. "Why are you doing this for me? You could lose your job." His eyes softened. "I've worked here 15 years. I've seen good people get chewed up by this place, and I've stayed quiet because I need this job to take care of my wife. She's been sick for 3 years, and the health insurance here is the only reason we can afford her treatments. But some things are more important than keeping your head down. You've always been kind to me, Miss Emily. You see, people really see them, even people like me that most folks look right through. That matters. And what they did to you today was wrong. I may not have much power, but I have this key, and I'm giving it to you." Tears burned behind my eyes, but I blinked them back. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you for having more courage than 40 other people in that office." "You be careful," Walter said again. "Get those documents, but don't let anyone see you. And Miss Emily, whatever you find, use it wisely. Men like Dylan, they don't go down easy." He squeezed my shoulder, once a fatherly gesture that nearly broke my composure, then walked back toward the stairwell. I watched him go, this elderly janitor who'd just risked everything to help me, and I felt something shift inside me. The humiliation and hurt from this morning began transforming into something else. Determination, anger, a need for truth. I looked at the key again, then closed my fist around it. The metal warmed in my hand. Tonight I would go back to that building. Tonight I would open locker 234, and tonight I would find out exactly why Dylan Parker destroyed my career. Whatever was in that locker, I was ready to face it. I spent the rest of the day at home unable to focus on anything. My apartment felt too quiet, too empty. I tried to eat lunch but couldn't stomach more than a few bites. I tried to watch television but couldn't follow the plot. My mind kept circling back to Walter's words. We need to get rid of Emily before she figures it out. Figures what out? What had I been close to discovering without even knowing it? I'd managed the Henderson Tech account, our biggest client, for 2 years. The recent $2 million campaign had been my crowning achievement. But now I tried to remember if anything had seemed off, any numbers that didn't quite add up, any conversations that felt strange. Nothing came to mind. Everything had seemed routine. At 7:30, as the sun set and Denver's city lights began to glow, I changed into dark jeans and a black hoodie. I felt ridiculous, like I was play acting at being a spy, but I didn't want to be recognized. I drove back downtown, my hands tight on the steering wheel, my heart racing. The building looked different at night. Most of the office windows were dark. Only a few lit squares showed where workaholics or cleaning crews remained. I parked on the street a block away and walked to the building. The main entrance was locked, but the gym had its own street-level entrance that stayed open until 9 for building tenants who worked out after hours. I pulled my hoodie up and kept my head down as I entered. The gym was small, just a few treadmills, weight machines, and a row of lockers along one wall. 2 people were there, a man running on a treadmill with earbuds in and a woman lifting weights. Neither looked at me as I walked straight to the lockers. I found number 234 in the back corner. My hands trembled as I pulled out Walter's key. The lock was old, and for a terrible moment I thought the key wouldn't work. Then it turned with a soft click. I opened the locker door. Inside was a thick brown envelope exactly as Walter had described. It felt heavy in my hands, stuffed full. I looked around. The man was still running, focused on his workout. The woman had moved to a different machine. Nobody was paying attention to me. I pulled out the envelope and closed the locker, locking it again. I couldn't look at the contents here, not in the open. I needed privacy. I walked quickly back outside, envelope tucked under my arm, and practically ran to my car. Inside, I locked the doors and turned on the interior light. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Inside were printed documents, a USB drive, and several pages of handwritten notes. I started with the printed pages. The first document was an email chain printed out. The names at the top made my blood run cold. Dylan Parker and Henderson Tech's CEO. But the subject line confused me. Revised contract terms, confidential. I'd negotiated the Henderson contract. I knew every term. Why would there be a revised version I didn't know about? I read through the emails, and with each line my confusion turned to horror. Dylan had negotiated a separate deal with Henderson Tech, cutting the campaign price by 20% without telling anyone. The official contract that went through the company showed the full price. But this secret agreement showed Henderson only actually paid 80% of what was recorded. Where did the missing 20% go? The next document answered that question. Bank statements, Dylan's personal bank account. 4 deposits over the past 6 months totaling $120,000. Payments directly from Henderson Tech's finance department to Dylan's private account. I felt sick. Dylan had been taking kickbacks. He'd been defrauding the company, making secret deals with clients, pocketing the difference, while the company books showed full revenue. This was embezzlement. This was fraud. This was a serious crime. But it got worse. The next email was between Dylan and someone named Richard Caldwell. I knew Richard. He was the vice president of operations, Dylan's boss. My hands trembled as I read their exchange. Richard. How much longer can we keep this going? Dylan. As long as we're careful. The contracts look clean. Nobody's questioning anything. Richard. What about Emily? She manages the Henderson account. She's detail-oriented. What if she notices the numbers don't match up? Dylan. She hasn't yet, but if she starts asking questions, we'll need to act fast. Richard, meaning Dylan, meaning we remove her from the equation before she can cause problems. We fabricate a reason to terminate her, make it public and humiliating so she's too shocked to fight back immediately. By the time she recovers, we'll have cleaned up any loose ends. I had to stop reading. My vision blurred with tears of rage and betrayal. They'd planned this. They'd been stealing from the company, and when they feared I might discover their scheme, they decided to destroy my career preemptively. I wasn't fired because I did anything wrong. I was fired because I was getting too close to the truth without even realizing it. The handwritten notes were in Dylan's writing. I recognized it from memos he'd written. They were calculations figuring out how to split the kickback money, with Richard planning which future clients they could run similar schemes with. It was all their documented evidence of their crimes. Finally, I picked up the USB drive. I pulled out my laptop from my bag and plugged it in. The drive contained audio files, recorded phone conversations. I clicked on the first one and listened with growing shock. It was Dylan's voice, clear as day. "Richard, we have a problem. Emily just asked me about some invoice discrepancies on the Henderson account. She wanted to know why some numbers she saw didn't match what she'd negotiated." Richard's voice responded. "Did she figure it out?" "Not yet," Dylan said. "But she's smart, too smart. She's going to keep digging, and when she does, she'll uncover everything. We can't let that happen." "So what do we do?" "We get rid of her," Dylan said coldly. "This week. I'll manufacture a reason. Some vague violation of company policy. We'll make it public so she's too humiliated and thrown off balance to mount an immediate defense. By the time she gathers herself, we'll have adjusted the books and erased anything she might have seen." "You're sure this will work?" "Positive," Dylan said. "I've done it before." The recording ended. I sat in my car, hands shaking, tears streaming down my face. They'd framed me. They'd destroyed my reputation, humiliated me in front of my colleagues, ruined 5 years of hard work, all to cover up their own crimes. And I'd been completely blindsided because I hadn't even realized I'd stumbled onto something suspicious. But now I knew. Now I had proof. Now I had documentation, bank statements, emails, recorded conversations, everything I needed to expose what Dylan and Richard had done. The question was, what would I do with it? I sat in that car for over an hour, staring at the documents spread across my passenger seat. The rage I felt was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't just hot anger. It was cold, calculating fury. These men had stolen from the company we all worked for. They'd betrayed the trust of everyone in that office. And when they feared being caught, they'd sacrificed me to save themselves. The memory of that morning burned through me again, standing in front of 40 people while Dylan announced my termination like I was nothing. The silence, the shame, Jessica's tears, Marcus's confusion, everyone watching me pack my desk under guard. The humiliation had been designed, calculated to break me so thoroughly that I wouldn't fight back. But Walter had given me a weapon. Evidence. Truth. The question was how to use it. I could go to the police. Embezzlement and fraud were serious crimes. But corporate crime investigations took time, and during that time, Dylan and Richard might find ways to cover their tracks further. They clearly had practice making evidence disappear. I could hire a lawyer and sue for wrongful termination. But lawsuits were expensive and lengthy. I'd burned through my savings fighting them, and there was no guarantee I'd win. Or I could go directly to the top. George Whitman, the company's founder and CEO. He was 60 years old, had built the company from nothing 30 years ago. His name was on the building. He had a reputation for integrity, for caring about the company culture. If I could reach him, show him what his VP and marketing director had been doing, maybe he'd act. That was the answer. I needed to go straight to George, but I couldn't just show up at his office. Dylan and Richard would block me. I needed to be smart about this. I drove home and spent the next several hours preparing. I scanned every document. I made multiple copies of the USB drive. I uploaded everything to a secure cloud storage. If Dylan and Richard discovered what I had, I needed backups they couldn't destroy. Then I drafted an email. I kept it professional, factual, unemotional. I explained what had happened, provided a brief overview of the evidence, and requested an urgent meeting to present my findings in detail. I attached selected documents that would be enough to prove I wasn't making wild accusations. At 10 o'clock that night, I sent the email directly to George Whitman's personal email address, which I'd seen on internal communications before. The subject line read, "Urgent evidence of fraud and wrongful termination." Then I waited. I barely slept that night. I kept checking my phone, my email, expecting nothing until morning at the earliest. But at 6:30 in the morning, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered hesitantly. "Hello? Emily, this is George Whitman." His voice was grave serious. "I received your email at 11 last night. I've been reading through the documents you sent for the past several hours. I need to see you immediately. Can you come to the building today, 10 o'clock? My personal conference room on the 8th floor." My heart raced. "Yes, I'll be there." "Emily," George said, and his voice carried something I couldn't quite identify, anger, sadness. "I'm sorry. If what you've shown me is true, and it certainly appears to be, then you were treated abhorrently. We'll get to the bottom of this, I promise you that." The call ended. I sat on my bed staring at my phone. George Whitman himself had read my evidence and believed me. Relief flooded through me, mixed with vindication. Finally, someone with power was listening. I got ready carefully. I wore a professional navy dress and blazer. I printed out additional copies of all the documents. I prepared a presentation outlining the timeline, the evidence, the financial impact on the company. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. At 9:45, I arrived at the building. The lobby felt different now that I knew what I knew. I wasn't sneaking in. I wasn't hiding. I was here at the CEO's invitation to expose corruption. The elevator ride to the 8th floor felt eternal. The doors opened to reveal a quiet, elegant space. George's assistant, an older woman named Margaret, greeted me with a sad smile. "He's expecting you, dear. Go right in." I opened the door to the conference room. George Whitman stood at the head of a long table. He was tall, silver-haired, wearing a crisp white shirt and tie, but his face looked older than I remembered, worn with stress. Beside him stood a woman I didn't recognize, professional and sharp-eyed. And there was another man, balding with glasses, holding a laptop. George extended his hand. "Emily, thank you for coming. This is Patricia Nguyen, our outside legal counsel, and this is David Chen." I mentally noted to remember this was a real person named Chen, not a character I invented. "David is an external auditor I've brought in. After reading your email, I immediately assembled a team. We've been reviewing the evidence you provided all morning." Patricia spoke, her voice firm. "Emily, I want you to know that what you've uncovered is extremely serious. If validated, we're looking at significant criminal and civil violations. Fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. Your wrongful termination would be the least of the charges against these individuals. The financial records you provided show clear discrepancies," David added. "I've already begun pulling company files to compare. There are definitely irregularities that need investigation." George gestured to a chair. "Please sit. Walk us through everything. From the beginning. Don't leave anything out." For the next 2 hours, I told them everything. I started with the morning I was fired, the public humiliation, the lack of explanation. I told them about Walter, the janitor who'd risked his job to help me. I showed them the documents from the locker, the bank statements, the emails between Dylan and Richard. I played the recorded phone conversations. As I spoke, George's face grew darker. Patricia took notes furiously. David typed on his laptop, pulling up company financial records and comparing them to the evidence I'd brought. When I finished, silence filled the room. Finally, George spoke. "Emily, You were fired as part of a cover-up. Dylan and Richard were running a kickback scheme defrauding this company of hundreds of thousands of dollars. When they feared you were getting close to discovering their crimes, they eliminated the threat. You. How did they even get these recordings? Patricia wondered aloud. Someone documented their own crimes. Dylan kept this as insurance, I guessed. If Richard ever tried to throw him under the bus, Dylan had proof Richard was equally involved. They were protecting themselves from each other while stealing from the company. David looked up from his laptop. I've found it. The Henderson account shows full revenue in our books, but when I cross-reference with actual deposits, there's a 20% shortfall. The missing money lines up exactly with the deposits into Dylan's personal account that Emily documented. And there are other accounts with similar patterns. Henderson wasn't the only one. This scheme has been running for at least 18 months. George stood abruptly and walked to the window staring out at Denver's skyline. When he turned back, his face was hard as stone. I built this company on integrity. Every person who works here should feel safe, valued, respected. What happened to you, Emily, is unconscionable. You were an excellent employee who did nothing wrong except be good at your job, and for that, you were publicly humiliated and fired. What happens now? I asked quietly. Now. Patricia said, we act. George has already authorized a full internal investigation. We'll be contacting law enforcement. Dylan Parker and Richard Caldwell will face criminal charges. They'll also face civil suits from the company to recover stolen funds. And Emily, you have a strong case for wrongful termination, defamation, and emotional distress. George returned to the table and sat down across from me. Emily, I want to offer you your job back, with a promotion, a raise, and full back pay for the time you've been out. I understand if you don't want to return to a place that treated you so badly, but the offer stands. You deserve it. I thought about this moment during the sleepless night. Mr. Whitman, I appreciate the offer, but I don't think I can come back. Too much has happened. The way I was treated, the way everyone just watched it happen, I can't unsee that. I need a fresh start. He nodded slowly. I understand. Then let me offer this. A severance package of 6 months' salary, far more generous than the insulting 2 weeks Dylan offered. A glowing reference letter from me personally, and our full support in any legal action you choose to take. Additionally, we'll make a public statement correcting the record about your termination, making clear you did nothing wrong. Tears pricked my eyes. Thank you, I whispered. No, George said firmly. Thank you. You could have walked away. You could have taken Dylan's severance and moved on. Instead, you uncovered a serious crime that was damaging this company and harming our employees. You showed more integrity than 2 men who held positions of power. That takes courage. Patricia closed her laptop. I recommend we move quickly. Emily, are you comfortable if we bring Dylan and Richard in today to confront them with this evidence? A cold satisfaction filled my chest. Yes, I want to be here when you do. George made 2 phone calls. His voice was calm but carried unmistakable authority. Dylan, I need you in my conference room immediately. It's urgent. A pause. No, it can't wait. Now. He hung up and dialed again. Richard, 8th floor conference room. Right now. We waited in tense silence. Patricia organized the documents on the table. David pulled up financial records on his laptop. I sat in my chair, hands folded, trying to keep my breathing steady. I was about to face the men who'd destroyed my reputation. 20 minutes later, the conference room door opened. Dylan walked in, looking confident and puzzled. He wore an expensive suit, his silver hair perfectly styled. He started to speak when he saw George, then froze when he saw me sitting at the table. His face went pale. Emily, what is she doing here? Dylan's voice came out higher than normal. Sit down, George said coldly. Richard appeared in the doorway behind Dylan, a short, balding man in his 50s. He also stopped short when he saw me. "George, what's going on? I've got meetings this afternoon." "Cancel them," George said. "Sit down." The two men sat, but Dylan couldn't take his eyes off me. I met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away. I wanted him to see that I wasn't broken, wasn't beaten, wasn't the humiliated woman he'd created 3 days ago. George remained standing, arms crossed. "Gentlemen, we've uncovered some very disturbing information. Information about financial fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Would either of you like to explain?" Dylan's professional mask snapped into place. "George, I don't know what you're talking about. Has there been some kind of accounting error?" "No error," Patricia said, opening a folder. "We have documentation of kickback schemes involving client contracts, specifically the Henderson Tech account and several others." Richard's face flushed red. "That's absurd. Who's been making these accusations?" "The evidence speaks for itself," David said, turning his laptop around. "Bank records showing deposits into your personal accounts, Dylan. Emails between the two of you discussing how to split the money. Recorded phone conversations." Dylan's confidence cracked. "Recorded conversations? That's impossible. Nobody was present during our private discussions." "You recorded yourselves," I said quietly. Everyone looked at me. "Insurance policies against each other. Making sure neither of you could betray the other without implicating yourself. But you got sloppy. You left the evidence where someone could find it." "This is ridiculous," Dylan said, but his voice shook. "George, we've worked together for 10 years. You're going to believe some disgruntled former employee over me." "She's not a former employee," George said sharply. "She's an employee you wrongfully terminated to cover up your crimes. We have proof, Dylan. Audio recordings of you and Richard planning to fire Emily specifically because she was getting close to discovering your scheme. We have your written notes calculating kickback splits. We have emails to clients negotiating secret price reductions. We have bank statements. You're finished." Richard stood up abruptly. "This is a misunderstanding. The contract negotiations were complicated. Sometimes there are legitimate reasons for revised terms." "Then explain," Patricia said calmly, "why those revised terms never appeared in company books. Explain why the missing 20% of revenue ended up in your personal bank accounts. Explain why you conspired to terminate a loyal employee who'd done nothing wrong except be good at her job." Dylan turned to look at me, and for the first time I saw something besides arrogance in his face. Fear. "Emily, listen. There's been a terrible mistake. Whatever you think you found, I can explain. We can work this out." "The way you worked things out 3 days ago?" I asked, my voice steady, despite the emotion churning inside me. "When you fired me in front of 40 people, when you humiliated me, refused to give me a reason, made me pack my desk under guard. When you tried to destroy my reputation to cover up your own crimes, that kind of working things out." Dylan's face hardened. "You don't understand the pressures of this industry. Sometimes accommodations need to be made." "Stealing isn't an accommodation," I said. "Fraud isn't an accommodation. And destroying someone's career to hide your crimes isn't an accommodation. It's evil." George's voice cut through the tension. "Dylan Parker, Richard Caldwell, you're both terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. You're not to return to your offices or contact any employees. Our legal team will be contacting law enforcement. You should expect criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. You should also expect civil suits from this company to recover the funds you stole. Get out of my building." Dylan's face twisted with rage and panic. "You can't do this, George. I've given 10 years to this company and spent at least 18 months stealing from it," George replied coldly. "Security is waiting outside. Leave now." 2 security guards entered, Tom among them. Seeing Tom, who'd escorted me out 3 days ago, now escorting Dylan, brought a sharp satisfaction. Dylan and Richard were led from the room, Dylan still sputtering protests, Richard silent and pale. When the door closed behind them, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. George sat down heavily. "Emily, I cannot apologize enough for what you went through. This company failed you. I failed you. You deserved better." "You didn't know," I said. Dylan and Richard hid their crimes well. If Walter hadn't risked everything to help me, they might have gotten away with it. "Walter," George said thoughtfully. "The janitor who gave you the key, I'd like to meet him. Anyone with that kind of integrity and courage deserves recognition." "He has a sick wife," I said. "He stayed quiet for so long because he couldn't risk losing his job and the health insurance. Please don't punish him for keeping the evidence hidden initially." "Punish him?" George looked shocked. "I want to reward him. He'll receive a bonus and my personal thanks. Without him, this might never have come to light." Patricia gathered her documents. "Emily will prepare all the paperwork for your severance and settlement, and if you decide to pursue additional legal action against Dylan and Richard personally, our firm would be happy to represent you." "Thank you," I said. "All of you, for listening, for believing me, for acting quickly." As I stood to leave, George stopped me. "Emily, I know you've decided not to return, but I hope you'll stay in touch. If you ever need a reference, if you ever need anything, my door is open. You've done this company a tremendous service." I nodded, too emotional to speak. I left the conference room, rode the elevator down, and walked out of the building into the bright Denver afternoon. The October air felt crisp and clean. The weight I'd been carrying for 3 days lifted from my shoulders. I'd done it. I'd fought back. I'd won. 2 weeks passed in a blur. George kept his word. The company issued a public statement acknowledging my wrongful termination and clarifying that I'd left on excellent terms. Dylan and Richard were arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. The local news covered the story corporate executives caught stealing from their own company. I watched the coverage with grim satisfaction. The severance package George provided was generous, more than enough to sustain me while I decided what came next. Several companies reached out after seeing the news, impressed by how I'd handled the situation. I had options, I had opportunities, but more than that, I had peace. I met Walter for coffee one afternoon at a small shop near his home. He looked uncomfortable in the cozy space, like he wasn't used to being the focus of attention. I'd called ahead and prepaid for anything he wanted. "Miss Emily," he said, standing when I arrived, "you didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did," I said, hugging him. "Walter, you saved me. You gave me the truth when everyone else stayed silent. You risked everything." He sat down, cradling a cup of coffee in his worn hands. "I only did what was right." "Most people don't," I said softly. "Most people look away. 40 people watched me get fired and said nothing. But you acted. That takes real courage." "How are you doing?" he asked. "Really doing?" I considered the question. "Honestly, I'm okay. Better than okay. What Dylan did was terrible. The humiliation, the betrayal, it hurt. But it also freed me. I'm not trapped in a job where my boss was a criminal. I'm not surrounded by people who'll watch injustice and stay silent. I have a chance to start fresh, to find something better. And I learned something important about myself." "What's that?" "That I'm stronger than I thought. That I won't let fear or shame keep me silent. That I'll fight for the truth even when it's hard." I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope. "Walter, this is for you, for your wife's treatments. It's part of the settlement money. You made it possible, so you should have it." He tried to refuse, but I insisted. He finally accepted with tears in his eyes. "Thank you, Miss Emily. You're a good person." "So are you," I said. "The best kind of person." Over the following weeks, I slowly reconnected with former colleagues. Jessica called me crying and apologizing for not speaking up that day. I forgave her. She'd been scared, and fear makes people freeze. Marcus reached out too, expressing his shock at what Dylan had been doing. Even Sarah sent a long email about how inspired she was by my courage. I appreciated their words, but I also understood something they didn't yet. The silence that day hadn't just been about fear, it had been about culture. A workplace culture where people learn to keep their heads down, to not ask questions, to accept whatever management said without pushing back. That culture had allowed Dylan and Richard to operate for 18 months without anyone noticing. That culture had made 40 people watch me get fired and say nothing. I didn't want to work in that culture anymore. I wanted to find or build something different. A place where speaking up was valued, where integrity mattered more than hierarchy, where people looked out for each other instead of just themselves. 3 months after that terrible Monday morning, I accepted a position at a smaller company, a startup in Boulder, focused on ethical marketing practices. The pay was less than I'd made before, but the environment felt right. My new boss valued transparency and encouraged questions. My new colleagues actually seemed to care about each other. On my first day, I sat at my new desk putting up a photo of my family and that same small cactus plant Frank who'd survived the ordeal with me. I looked around at the open, bright space, at the people who'd welcomed me warmly, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I opened it and smiled. It was Walter. "First day at the new job. Knock them dead, Miss Emily. Proud of you." I texted back. "Thank you for everything, Walter. For seeing me, for believing in me, for giving me that key." His response came quickly. "You unlocked the door yourself. I just showed you where it was." That evening, I drove home through Boulder's streets, the Rocky Mountains visible in the distance, their peaks still snow-capped even as spring approached. I thought about everything that had happened, the humiliation of that October morning, the crushing betrayal, the cold metal key pressed into my palm in a parking garage, the evidence that proved I'd done nothing wrong, the confrontation in George's conference room, the vindication of seeing Dylan and Richard led away in handcuffs. I'd learned that justice isn't always swift or easy. Sometimes you have to fight for it. Sometimes you have to stand up alone before anyone else will stand with you. Sometimes the people who seem most powerful are actually the most fragile, built on lies and fear, rather than true strength. I'd learned that dignity isn't something someone can take from you with a public firing or humiliating scene. Dignity is something you carry inside yourself, something that survives even when the world tries to strip it away. I'd walked out of that office carrying a cardboard box and my dignity intact, even though it hadn't felt like it at the time. Most importantly, I'd learned that the quietest voices sometimes carry the loudest truths. Walter hadn't given grand speeches or made bold gestures. He'd simply pressed a key into my hand and whispered a few words. But those words, that small act of courage, had changed everything. As I pulled into my apartment complex, I thought about that key now sitting in a drawer at home. I'd kept it. A reminder that sometimes the smallest things, a piece of metal, a whispered conversation, a simple act of kindness from an unlikely source, can unlock doors you didn't even know existed. Sometimes the people who seem most powerful are actually the most fragile. And sometimes the quietest voices, like Walter's, carry the loudest truth. I learned that dignity isn't given by a title or a desk. It's something you carry inside even when the world tries to strip it away. Have you ever been wrongfully treated at work? Have you ever witnessed injustice and wondered whether to speak up? Drop your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you handled it. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that they're stronger than they think, that truth matters, and that one person's courage can change everything. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for believing that integrity still matters in this world. I hope you find your own Walter when you need one, or better yet, I hope you become someone else's Walter. someone who sees the truth and has the courage to act on it. Stay strong, stay honest, and remember that no job title or paycheck is worth sacrificing who you are. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.